Welcome to today's podcast interview. I brought on Dr. Ed Slover. Dr. Ed, welcome.
Thanks, Heather. I'm really happy to be here.
Please give listeners a little background. Where do you live and what do you do?
I currently live in Phoenix, Arizona, and just ended an 8-year career as a business professor at Grand Canyon University. I've decided, like you did in 2017, to take the leap into being a business owner and entrepreneur, getting into the leadership consulting space, the personal growth and development, particularly with mindset. And I also feel like I'm fulfilling a calling, starting a ministry of all things, which in a previous version of myself would find that completely absurd, and yet it's taking off. But prior to getting into higher education, I spent 16 years in the commercial health and fitness industry in multiple roles, and that was just a wonderful experience. But to present day, very, very excited about the possibilities with stepping into the unknown. And it's been perfectly strange because I experienced nothing but joy and calm, even though I don't necessarily know what's on the other side of the void.
Well, okay. So in our pre-call, we talked about a lot there. I hope we can still cover all of it, but something you just touched on, because I know we're both into Dr. Joe Dispenza. You talked about stepping into the unknown. Now, I call myself recovering type A planner. I had to have, everything mapped out. I had to be in control of my life, and I am completely not like that at all. I barely commit to plans like 2 weeks from now. So for somebody who maybe is in there and what you just touched on, quote, an identity shift, can you talk about what it means to step into the unknown and why, that's one way to get out of our way?
Yeah. Before I go there, I also am a recovering type A. So you and I, and we learned this during the pre-call, that we're seemingly on parallel paths, where it's extraordinarily difficult to intellectualize what it means to surrender and step into the unknown, and to repurpose what Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about. It's this idea of unmemorizing yourself, where we can look at the first half of our life, and that part of our life is about education. It's about career. It's about material acquisition, money, status, everything that is about our ego. And then at some point, there's a shift, and we call that shift midlife crisis. At least most of us do. And when we don't necessarily know how to handle that, we basically double down on the first half of our life and wreck relationships and buy Bugattis, versus actually taking stock and saying, hey, that part of our life was extraordinarily important to get us to this place, but it's not going to actually allow us to transition into the second half of our life, which is more about legacy or service or fulfillment. Because when we look back at the first half of our life, we fundamentally realize that those things made us momentarily happy, but they didn't fill us with joy. And it's like, okay, well, what's part of that process in middle age? Well, we carry with us a lot of baggage. There's a lot of pain, there's trauma, there's disappointments. And in order for us to make the transition functionally or successfully, in many ways, we have to go give the younger version of ourselves a hug and reconcile that, hey, back then you coped how you coped and you did a really good job because it got you to this point, but you can't come with me the second half of the journey. You just can't. So I love you. I have to let you go. And that's really difficult for people because that's what is most familiar. But we're stepping into the unfamiliar, which is quite literally stepping into the unknown. We're in effect cutting a new neurochemical groove that will allow us to see, more blessings and more opportunities and take advantage of those.
Well, what you also just shared was, that chasing the fulfillment, it's all of our conditioning and programming. That's what we were taught. So how about let's talk a little bit about that and the subconscious mind and understanding, We all have done the best we could with what we have, but now that we know better, it's time to do better. So I'd love if you could share a little bit maybe about the conditioning and programming, but also the idea of what I wrote down. It's truly a death of our old self in order to, I know you're really big on up leveling a mindset. So if you want to up level your health, your finances, relationships, your life, it is a death of the old self.
That's right. That's right. About a year ago, I was sitting with my wife and I actually told her, Heather, I'm like, I think I'm doing this midlife crisis thing wrong because I haven't divorced you and I haven't, bought things I can't afford. And then about a week later, we were sitting there. I'm like, maybe I'm doing this thing right because I haven't divorced you and I haven't bought those things that I can't afford. It truly is. And you said it really well just then. It's a death to oneself. Well, it's like, how do we do that? Because up until we gain the awareness to want to move beyond the previous version of ourselves and unmemorize that version, our thoughts take us captive because we have something like 60 to 70,000 thoughts every day, 80% of which are negative, 95% of which are repetitive. So we're on autopilot. And that should alarm everyone because if you do the math, that's roughly 3,000 thoughts a day that are conscious or that are unfamiliar. It's like, well, what if we actually decided to take our thoughts captive? What if we actually, took stock of those things that especially those things that in the earlier part of our life, to say, I'm not achieving what I want to achieve. I'm not realizing the fulfillment that I want to realize in this life. I now have to make a decision to interrogate what those things are that are ultimately holding me back.
Yeah.
And it's extraordinarily scary to do that because we know we're going to encounter pain in the ultimate reconciliation of whatever those things are. But here's the thing I find fascinating, and I've gone through this relatively recently. It's that part of our programming and conditioning, the old Protestant work ethic, is to keep our head down and toil and struggle and grind and suffer. And that's not to say that life isn't without challenges. It is. But what if we lifted our eyes and expanded our field of vision to see what God or the universe or source actually brings into our field of vision? And then we get to pick those things that we want to explore, we want to go work on. I think that is really, really cool. But it does involve making a decision to look back on a previous version of ourselves and say, you know what, this one won't lead to fulfillment. And we've got 30, 40 or more years of proof that illustrate that it hasn't led to fulfillment.
Well, and the big thing is, I heard, are you familiar with Jesse Itzler?
I'm not.
So Jesse Itzler is married to Sarah Blakely. She's the founder of Spanx. Jesse Itzler, this guy has so much energy. He's a multi-passionate entrepreneur. The guy, I just love him. And so his big tagline, one of his companies, he has several, but one of them is Build Your Life Resume. And I was watching his Insta story last week. He just finished what he calls Hell on the Hill. It's the hilliest half marathon in the world. They did it out in Georgia. But anyway, what Jesse was teaching these people, and I don't know how many were at the event, hundreds, if not like 1,000 or whatever. He's like, what is your personal mission statement? Now, especially with business, we're taught to come up with a mission statement for business. But in order to get out of autopilot, because I have found most people lack clarity, don't even know what they want in life. So I did this exercise. I sat down last week and I was like, what is my personal mission statement? Another phrase you might have heard of, what legacy do you want to leave behind? And something I wrote down while you were sharing that, like we have to shine a light on the dark. And what Dispenza talks about is we create change from two opportunities in life, either from pain and suffering. So a lot of people, it's rock bottom, bankruptcy, divorce, health scare, or we can create change in our life from a desire for more, from inspiration. Most people tend to wait for that pain and suffering.
Yep.
So, on that idea, kind of a wake up call, this opportunity that I believe every moment is a fresh start, but every day for sure, like you woke up today, what can you offer people as a starting point that, you create your reality? How do we up level our life?
Practically speaking, I think the first thing that we should do is assess how we're spending our time and then make the shift to managing energy instead of managing time. So for me, I would look at my weekly calendar and knowing that we all have the same 168 hours in every week. We spend the majority of that time sleeping. And then we start really assessing how are we spending our time in order to find time bandits. What are those things that we're paying a disproportionate amount of time to that aren't adding productive value to our life? And in no specific order, this might include spending time on social media, provided that you're not monetizing on social media, or binge watching, Netflix, or engaging in addictive behaviors, or dysfunctional things. It's like taking stock and really taking a comprehensive, fair assessment of how you're ultimately spending your time, and then looking at those things that do add productive value and figuring out how can I do more of those? How can I enhance my relationships with the people I claim I love the most? How can I move beyond the corporate world and figure out a way to become a business owner or entrepreneur? Tony Robbins was asked years ago, it's like, how were you able to start businesses? You were basically a janitor and floor sweeper. He's like, well, I slept 8 hours, I worked 8 hours, and I built my business in the other 8 hours. So he's able to, crack that code. But what we end up finding is in that type of analysis are the half dozen things or so every day that we can do excellently. And that's the space where I'm in now. I know I can get to about 7 to 8 things every day that I know I can do excellently. And I'm going to do those things. And if I don't get to anything else, I won my day. I can walk away, even though the to-do list still has things on it. I know I won my day, and I feel good about myself. I feel positive and optimistic about what tomorrow will bring. So I think practically speaking, it's working to make this mental shift towards managing energy, not managing time, but going to what we have that's familiar, which is our schedule, and really trying to unpack what that looks like on a daily or weekly basis.
So, a couple things on this idea of managing our time. I remember when I had my first coach back in 2016, that was one thing I complained about. I was like, there's not enough time in the day. We all have the same amount of hours in a day. And so he put me on, I think he called it something like time inventory or whatever. And so I did. I had to start tracking my time. And something I learned in the last couple of years, an easy 3-step process to get things off your plate, figure out what's most important, is to automate. What can you automate, eliminate, and delegate?
Yep.
That's it. Like when I figured out, and it was a little expensive up front, but I found the tech guy that I needed. And we could talk about Dispenza and how it came to me, and it was amazing. But when I found the tech guy that I needed, he was able to do all the automation of all the things I was doing. And I have saved so much time and headache and to-dos and whatever by getting, quote, systems in play. But that was for business. Let's talk about how we can get systems in play for, you touched on it, our energy. Let's talk about what energy is first.
Well, for me, it starts with getting enough sleep. For most adults, 7 to 9 hours is the sweet spot. I find that I function really pretty well right around the 7-hour mark. And if we don't get adequate sleep, everyone knows our performance ultimately suffers. It doesn't matter what it is. Maybe we're able to cope with it in the short term, but long term, it creates a negative feedback loop. So that's really where I start. Am I getting enough sleep? And we've got to eliminate those things that run counter to our ability to get adequate rest. Like, don't have your cell phone in the bedroom. Buy an old-fashioned alarm clock, because the research is absolutely clear about the negative effects of blue light. And the research is also clear that just by virtue of having our phone nearby, it's a distraction, even when we're asleep. It's really sort of a fascinating thing. From there, I create routines, rituals, and habits. I wake up at the same time every day, about 4:30 every day. I ease into my morning with a light walk, catch up on current events, and then I work out. I'm a morning exerciser, and I fully appreciate some people don't do that. But what I find with the cumulative effect of doing that is I'm more energized throughout the day. And then go into meditation, read some inspirational works, and then get into my workday. Because one of the things that I've grown to learn is that I'm unwilling to sacrifice the relationships that matter to me the most. And I need a stopping point every single day. And that's at 6 o'clock. I shut it off so I can then have the quality time with my wife and two girls to be able to do that. So within that workday, though, I look at my list of things to do and figuring out, okay, I can do up to 7 to 8 things excellently, but some tasks today may be a little bit more involved, and I might not get to that number. And what I also have found that works is if at any point I notice that my performance is starting to wane, I stop what I'm doing and I take a rest break. That might be walking around the block just to clear my head, get the blood flowing a little bit. It might even involve a 30 to 45-minute nap. So there's so many things that we have the ability to integrate into our lives, provided that we're willing to move beyond the distractions. This is this idea that we jump at shadows. We spend too much time focusing on things that really don't matter in the grand scheme of things. We end up worrying about things that never come to pass. And that absolutely drains our energy reserves versus focusing on those things that actually allow us to jump over our shadows and add productive value.
Okay, there's several things coming to mind, but one question I have first, have you always lived this way?
No.
Yeah.
No, I haven't. I would imagine being a recovering type A personality like you, Heather, everything was structured. Every second was filled and accounted for. And I don't know about you, but if I didn't feel like I was being productive, I felt guilty. Like taking a vacation, it would take me 3 days to unwind. I'd have a day and a half of being able to relax. And then I started thinking about everything that I needed to get to when we got back to, quote, real life.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's the default position. I don't think that's the default setting and how we're designed. I think the default position is living a life that's more joyful and that has more peace in it. And when we live in that space, it's unbelievably fascinating what we can ultimately get done. And we do so in a really inspired way. So sorry, long answer to a short question. No, I haven't always lived in this space.
Well, I just wanted to highlight that because what you shared, you're currently living very mindfully and intentionally. Those are the terms I use. You wake up, it's self-care, filling up your cup, taking care of your headspace and energy to take on the day. Something that came to mind that I've had to overcome, and sometimes I still catch myself doing this. I used to live in high stress mode. That's just what I knew. And it started back, I remember I was 15, working a part-time job at Subway while I was in high school and a cheerleader. I was busy 7 days a week. And then I moved into college. Now I'm working full-time while managing 5 franchises. Again, I'm busy 7 days a week. Then I get into corporate. Well, then I need my social calendar, mapped out. So I was busy 7 days a week. I Free time to be alone with my thoughts? Hell no. I'm like a 180 difference from that. I don't sometimes I feel like I have FOMO and then I go out and do social stuff and I'm like, I'd much rather be at home. Now I crave silence, stillness. I don't like stress, but sometimes I catch myself needing to like multitask and do all these things or feeling rushed and I'm like, whoa. So these are habits. I'm very conscious of them. Can we talk about how to be conscious of the unconscious, how to unmemorize and break these habits so that we can create this new way of being?
Yeah, the story you just told is similar in with my experience with. Let me just start here. My dad died when I was 13. He suffered from pancreatic cancer. He was only 39 years old, and we cope how we cope. Yeah, about a year and a half afterwards, both of my older sisters had moved out. My mom got the first full-time job she'd ever had in her life, and she started living her life again. And it was time for her to do that. Well, I didn't know where to turn, and fortunately, I learned enough early on to not get in trouble. I found myself getting to school and getting homework done every day. And when I was in my late teens and early 20s, I started reading philosophy. And I was filling my time like you were filling your time with work. I was filling my time with intellectualizing everything. That was my conscious reality. And if I wasn't doing that, I didn't feel like I had any self-worth. Fast forward, into my 20s and throughout in my 30s, and my mom kept telling me throughout the years, it's like, you just overthink everything, you intellectualize everything. And she's like, you don't feel enough. And I would always push back against that. Always. Life for me was toil and struggle. It was living in a space of being angry. And it wasn't until I went inward, because I knew something was missing. I just didn't know what it was. And it wasn't until I got quiet that I was able to start examining the really where that foundation was laid, and looking at various decisions of consequence throughout my life. And I ultimately made those decisions, subconsciously or unconsciously, based on a period of my life that where I endured a lot of pain. And I had to consciously look at that pain and figure out, okay, what's the best coping mechanism to continue to moving beyond that. Now I'm a person of deep spiritual faith, and for me it was going inward and connecting to the part of us that which is God or the universe or source, and with the recognition, and I think this is an important call out, with the recognition that it's not a light switch. Healing is a process. It's not like from one moment to the next, it just completely ends.
Yeah.
It requires, like you had said, sometimes you catch yourself, sort of the whole muscle memory thing, and then you get back into a more peaceful spot. So we have to be willing to look at it, and until we're willing to look at it, then we'll be stagnant, or in some schools of thought, we'll just continue regressing.
Something you brought up in the last few weeks, I don't know if it was a meme or what, but I saw this and it was that the longest journey any human will ever take is the 14 inches from their head to their heart.
I love that.
I know. And that was like an epiphany, an aha, like, holy crap, because it's true. And most of us are, I call it heady. We're very heady. A lot of people experience mental chaos. We're living stressed out, like living stress and burnout has become the new norm when it is, Dispenza calls it an altered state of being. And most people, it's become the norm. Men especially, you guys are taught from a very young age to suppress emotions, to not feel, which leads you to being so heady, over analytical, intellectualizing, rather than, I think, women and men have this capability, but women a little more intuitive, a little more in our feelings. So can we touch on the importance of, it is shining a light, going within, expressing these emotions, not suppressing them?
Yeah, you're right. We are taught as men that vulnerability is weakness. And we were lied to. We were absolutely lied to. Being able to be vulnerable and demonstrate a high degree of emotional intelligence, or being willing to put ourselves out there, is the definition of courage. It ultimately, it's the definition of strength, and both for men and women, because whenever we communicate in a vulnerable way, or communicate those things to try to relate better to other people emotionally on that level, we have no idea whether or not we're going to be received well. We have no idea if we're going to be accepted or rejected. We just don't have any idea. And it really does require us to take a leap of faith to say, hey, if I truly want the deep, meaningful connections, not only with myself, but with other people, that's how I ultimately get what I say I want. Because if you think about it, the root of the word relationship is relate. Well, you and I can relate in a heady way, but that's uninspiring. That's more of a superficial connection. But whenever we share a really good laugh with one another, or we share a really good cry with one another, it's funny because everyone in the world has had those experiences and walked away from those experiences feeling way more connected to the other person. And so really a shift in mindset, and this is what I mean by leveling up, that shift where it's taking a look at those things that we were programmed by, or even the programmers. Our parents did the best job they could, or they did what they did with what they had at their disposal, but it doesn't mean it's automatically right. If we look at it like, well, why was I taught that? What were the cultural dynamics that led my parents to teach me that vulnerability was weakness? And re-examining it and shifting the mindset, like, what do I want? Really, what do I want in this life? We've got what, 80 years ish? What do I ultimately want? And if we want to continue living a life of distraction and living in pain and being miserable and cynical and jaded, we can keep doing that. We can.
Yeah.
But if we don't, and we want something better,
Yeah.
then we need to shift and reframe how we ultimately think about things.
I just wrote down, and I'm like, please don't keep living that way. But it's an idea of, we can live in survival mode, which are what most people are doing, just getting by, or we can thrive in this lifetime. And I truly believe we all have the potential so much grander than we're all living and experiencing. But something that's coming to mind when you were sharing that, what I would love for people to do is, one, to kind of take inventory, but to reflect. Like, if there's any area of lives that you have a chokehold, lack, fear, scarcity, whether it's the big three, I guess, that I experience with people: money, relationships, and I guess mental health. So those three, if you have struggle in any of those areas, understand, and Dr. Bruce Lipton says this, that our life is an output of our subconscious programming.
Yep.
If you have money problems, if you have relationship problems, you have to understand that it's your quote programming. If you think of like a computer, your OS, your operating system, that's where you got to pull the weeds and plant new seeds. Or quote, we've all heard this term, generational trauma.
Yep.
So Gma grew up in the Great Depression, so lots of fear, scarcity around money, who would of course pass that on to her children, my mom and my aunts. And my mom broke the cycle, but she started on this personal development, self-help, whatever you want to call it, journey decades ago, when I was just a munchkin. So thank goodness, because otherwise we just repeat the cycles.
That's right.
So on that note, is there something that you could share as like a tangible takeaway if individuals find themselves surviving, going through the motions, but all right, I'm ready to decide I want change in my life. What's the first step?
I think beyond making an assessment, and I like the word you use, inventory of various parts of our life. So, looking at the outcomes and what fed those outcomes, how we're spending our time, all of those things. But I'm a proponent of making smaller incremental changes by taking action first. It's commonly accepted, and I don't think this is just an either or conversation. I think it's more of a both and conversation. But there are some people that feel as though they need to have everything lined up before they take action on something. My mom's very much like this. She needs to, quote, have her ducks in a row before she will take a step.
Yeah.
I would advocate the reverse. And that's an example of stepping into the unknown. You don't necessarily know what the result of taking that step will be, and that's okay. I don't think the goal is to be less afraid. I think the goal is to be a little bit braver, and sort of shifting that idea where, let's say someone has a weight loss goal, but they don't necessarily know where to start, and they feel like they have to get in shape before they'll join a health club or something. Like, well, what about this? What about waking up 10 minutes earlier and going for a walk, and starting there and celebrating that as a win, because it is.
Yeah.
Or maybe you want to start expanding your knowledge, and you want to read every day, and you're like, I can't possibly find time to sit down and do that. Well, you've already done sort of the schedule assessment. Figure out a way where on your lunch break or something else where you can carve out 5 to 10 minutes. It's fascinating that if you read 20 pages a day, you finish something like 30 books a year. And so it's really this investment. It's this cumulative effect of these small incremental changes over time that eventually start cascading and create positive feedback loops. And then you have more energy because you've gotten up 10 minutes early, and now you want to get up 15. And it's really, it ties to what I've frequently called non-disruptive changes. What are those things, those levers that we can pull that don't cause us a lot of psychological, emotional, physical, or spiritual pain?
Yeah.
Like, can I make these minor tweaks to my life and then start letting the momentum carry us forward, right? Another way of thinking about it, though, is doing that helps to stop the negative momentum, which is inversely related to living a better life.
Okay, so a couple notes that came to mind there. Number one, that's a form of self-sabotage, right? Your ducks, I've never experienced it, but all of your ducks being in a row before you can get started, I don't think it's going to happen. You just have to get started and trust and have faith. This might have been in the secret, but like if you have a 2,000-mile journey, just trust that the next mile will unfold and the next mile will unfold. But you got to get in the car. You got to start. The saying, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time?
Right.
But here's a real world example. I have a client that is talking himself out of greatness because he's like, I really want to stop renting. I really want to buy my own home, but I need $80,000 to buy my first home. How am I ever going to save $80,000? See how we talk ourselves out of it? So my advice was, why don't you save your first 1,000? 500, 100, save 100. You got to start somewhere. And then all of a sudden, how quickly that'll, maybe it's lifestyle changes. Drinking's a big thing for him. Hey, bud, let that go. How much are you spending a week boozing?
Right. Exactly.
But anyway, the point is like, stop talking yourself out of it and find possibility. Ask better questions. How can I make this happen? Not, I can't do that thing.
Yep, exactly right. When what you're referring to is inverse thinking, and we can do that either way. We're creatures that need to have an aim at something. Well, if that looks if that looks daunting, we can actually say, okay, well, what are those things that might prevent me from moving forward toward that aim faster? And how can I remove those impediments in order to allow me to get there? Right. With what you're saying is like examine, yes, those things that you think are stopping you, and then take a look at those things that we can actually remove, because sometimes we just need to stop the negative momentum that we can remove that would set him up for much greater success. So I love that.
Yeah. And what Abraham Hicks says, take a nap. And I've done that. If I'm like tail spinning or falling down a rabbit hole and it feels chaotic, the easiest, fastest way to stop that momentum, take a nap. If you can't do that, go for a walk, go for a run, turn on a good song, dance for 3 minutes.
Yep.
Change your focus. All right, here's what I want to ask you. We've touched on a lot, and I feel like we've given some tangible takeaways. What do you believe is one key takeaway you want listeners to get?
I think based on what we've talked about today is it starts with a decision. And that decision will either keep us stuck in what we claim we don't want, or it will allow us to take new and different and even inspired action. But it takes a decision. Before we started recording, I shared with you that my wife had fallen out of a consistent fitness routine, and I invited her to join me on a couple of days ago, and she did, because we enjoy spending that time together. And Heather, you would never have known that she hadn't been working out for 3 or more months, because she had joy on her face. And it occurred to me about an hour afterwards, I'm like, I finally figured you out. After 10 years, I finally figured you out that it's not the act itself. It's the decision. It's how we overinflate degree of difficulty.
Yeah.
It's how we, when we look at our task list, like, I can't possibly ever get this done. And what we end up doing in the process, unwittingly, is that we add stress and anxiety that's completely unnecessary, versus saying, okay, what's a manageable or digestible way for me to move forward, and then making the decision to take that step. Is it reversible? Probably. Do we get more short-term benefit than long-term benefit? I don't know. That depends on the decision, and vice versa. Do I have enough information to be able to make the decision? This idea has been used by the military forever, where if we have less than 40% of the information necessary to make a decision, we probably don't have enough. But if we have more than 70% of the information necessary, we're not moving fast enough. And we're actually engaging in self-sabotage. And in that 40 to 70% is really having the courage to step into the void.
Chunk it down, then start moving. Love that. Here's what I'd love to do to wrap up the interview. I have a couple of rapid fire questions for you.
Okay.
What is a quote or motto that you live by?
I actually wrote this down from Mark Twain. I've had a lot of worries in my life, most of which never happened.
Yep. There's on that note, there's a saying out there, and I don't know if it was a quote or kind of like a funny joke, but worrying is like, a rocking chair. It gives you something to do and gets you nowhere.
I love that.
Yes.
I love that. I'm going to write that one down myself.
What is a book you're currently reading or highly recommend?
Book I'm currently reading is called Necessary Endings. I don't remember the author's name off the top of my head, but it really is this idea that we have various periods or seasons in our life, and the people that come in and out of those periods or seasons. So it's not just necessary endings with people, although that's certainly true, but it could be necessary endings related to a job, or a particular activity. Certainly, something like addictive behavior would be a necessary ending. So it's a really interesting read, and it's full of stories that are illustrative of how we go about making the decisions to arrive at what is a necessary ending.
Love that. All right, final question. What advice would you give your younger self?
Oh gosh. I I wish I let me start that over. If I could advise my younger self, I would say you need to listen to your mom. My mom had me pegged so early on, and I fought against all of it, but not in a disrespectful way. I never got into trouble despite being a latchkey kid. But she was right in that my coping strategy stemming back to my father's death was to intellectualize everything. And I, quite frankly, even intellectualized what she was telling me without truly letting it letting it touch my heart, and to live a much softer life. And softer, but what I mean by that is being more tolerant, being more vulnerable, versus just constantly having to achieve and grind and be that, that type A. So if I had a do-over, I would have listened more closely to my mom.
Oh, mom. Such a great note to end on. Ed, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your story.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, Heather.